If you're not following what is going on with Joe Rogan lately, then you are missing out on some insane news that actually has way broader implications for our nation. There is an all-out blitz, a full court press against the Joe Rogan podcast, against him being able to say what he wants to say, because the people that are pushing for this, the left-wing activists in the media, in social media, and now in the government, and by the way, they were in the government before, and they were pushing for this before. Jen Psaki very famously called for censorship of social media companies, but now they're really going in on it, and now it's the Surgeon General, and that's what we're going to talk about today. How Joe Rogan's right to freedom of speech is being put under threat under the guise of misinformation. However, we have a transition, we're gonna roll into it, and I'll catch you on the other side. It's Stay Winter Warm mini heater. Pretty cool, get one. Heating costs are soaring, and according to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, the price of energy this winter is up dramatically. Multi-year highs is what we're talking about. If you have gas heating, you're spending 30% more to heat your house this winter, and if you have oil, it's not looking that much better for you. But luckily for you, there is a solution. Stay Winter Warm is now offering this little energy heater that is intended to heat a room in only minutes for 50% off right now at this moment. And this thing is legit. I've actually been waiting for this and texting my rep for this sample for a really long time, because I put this in my girlfriend's bathroom because there actually aren't heating vents in the bathroom in her new apartment. This thing is perfect. It can save you money on your electricity bills. On top of that, it can also heat a drafty room where you have to just crank up the thermostat in order to get that room hot. Whether that be a garage, a bathroom, or that one room in every household where it appears there just is no insulation in the walls. What's up with that? It also comes with a remote, which is great for lazy people like me, and you're getting it for 50% off, and there's a 30-day money-back guarantee, and at the price that this thing costs, you can basically save that much in your heating bill in a single month, so it pays for itself. Pretty awesome all around. StayWinterWarm.com. So chances are, if you're on the internet.com, you've seen a lot of Joe Rogan information lately. H3H3 very famously went after Joe Rogan very recently and fell on his face immediately when he started making wild assertions that he got from the mainstream media that were totally not based in fact. He even had this weird line in there where he talked about how Joe Rogan has tar in his lungs, even though Joe Rogan doesn't smoke tobacco. So that's a really weird allegation. And I know a lot of you put down in the comments, Joe Rogan smokes weed, you can get tar in your lungs from weed. But the thing is, Ethan Klein also smokes weed, so that's even weirder of a line of attack against Rogan coming from Ethan. But that is by no means the only recent attack against Joe Rogan that has come out, based on the fact that Rogan is saying things that people don't like, and we're no longer a country where we can tolerate disagreements in opinion. Neil Young, who is a musician, I've never heard of him, not because he's not famous or good, just because I don't know anything about music, recently told Spotify that it's either him or Joe Rogan, and he wants all his music taken off the platform, or Joe Rogan gets gone and then the music could stay. Now, of course, Spotify, who gave Joe Rogan $100 million, Joe Rogan, who's the #1 podcaster in America, sided with Joe Rogan because Joe Rogan also would not have signed a contract with the company for exclusivity if that empowered that company to censor them. And they told Neil Young to take a walk. But that also led to a bunch of other activists in the media who are playing at reporter to call for other musicians to do the same. And by the way, I don't like Ethan. I've talked about all the problems I have with H3H3 Productions. I don't like his podcast. I don't like how he's lecturing people on morality, but he's working with a communist, somebody who promotes an authoritarian genocidal ideology and pretends like it's no big deal. But at least Ethan Klein had the honor to go after Joe Rogan with his own name attached to it, not hiding behind the guise of reporting the news. Everything he said in his tweets was wrong, and Ethan Klein is an absolute joke for doing so. But at least it's better than Philip DeFranco, who allegedly is reporting this story, yet clearly advocating for other musicians to boycott Spotify in order to censor Joe Rogan.
The letter was to Young's management, not Spotify directly. People wondering, are they going to do something? But there's really no reason to think that Spotify is going to do anything different than what we've been seeing for a while now. Because let's say ideologically, the upper people at Spotify, they don't even agree with Rogan. Maybe they're even horrified by it. I don't think that's the case, but let's say that. Spotify and their actions have made it clear that they are big believers and the market will decide what the market will decide. Also, they they probably lean that way because they spent a fuck ton of money to bring Joe Rogan to the platform. So if you base this just on the numbers, I mean, Young has around 6 million monthly listeners on Spotify, whereas Joe Rogan has the #1 podcast on Spotify and pretty much in the world. So if they're deciding by the market and numbers, it's not exactly Sophie's choice.
There's something that really bothers me more and more every time I watch Philip DeFranco clips, and it's this idea that I'm just over it, man. I'm connecting with you. Aren't you guys over all this? And I'm not really going to state my position except when it's obvious and easy and I can get social brownie points for it. But if there's any risk in me stating my position, I won't do it. But instead, I'm going to say, wouldn't it be interesting if a bunch of people, other musicians, also decided to pull away from Spotify over Joe Rogan? Maybe that would have an impact. Maybe if other followers of those musicians pressured those musicians to get them to participate in the silencing of Joe Rogan, maybe that would work and Neil Young could be the first step. Again, this isn't reporting, this is activism.
But where it could potentially become an issue is if other artists see what Young did and go, yeah, I'm gonna follow suit. And or if it led to fans of other big mainstream musical artists going, oh, what Young did, I didn't even realize that was an option. I'm gonna tell my favorite artists they should do the same thing. But personally, I don't really see that happening to a point that moves the needle in any way. I mean, I've been wrong before, but I don't think I'm gonna be wrong on this. You know, there's that idiom, money moves mountains, but also money keeps things in place too. But hey, with all of that said, what are your thoughts on this situation?
All of the lies, nonsense, and ironically misinformation about Joe Rogan and his position on the vaccine has been regurgitated without question by Philip DeFranco as well. So everything that Ethan said and stated outright, as ridiculous as it was, Philip DeFranco also believes, but instead of actually coming out and saying it, instead of owning up to the fact that he believes that, he's decided to say, well, wouldn't it be interesting if I'm just reporting this, but if everybody got together and they boycotted Spotify over Joe Rogan, wouldn't that silence him? Not that I'm advocating for it, but I mean, if he's spreading misinformation, and probably you guys should go contact your musicians and get this guy silenced. I mean, let me know. It's a conversation. It's a conversation. The Philip DeFranco show is a conversation. It's not a conversation. It's a show. That may have bothered me a little bit more than I thought until I actually started talking about it, but you know what? Needed to be said, needed to be put out there. You guys needed to hear it. And today we're going to move on from these like private sector people, these people in social media companies, which by the way, are being heavily influenced by the government. A lot of them have interviewed government officials. A lot of them have connections to the social media companies and actively put pressure on those companies to censor other users and content creators for those companies. But that's all private sector nonsensical whatever. What we're talking about today is the United States Surgeon General, a federal government position, a cabinet level position, going on MSNBC with Mika Brzezinski and talking about how the social media companies need to step up to censor Joe Rogan and stop his spread of misinformation because Joe Rogan is literally killing people. People are dying, aka we need to subordinate all of your liberties to the whim of this authoritarian thug.
Rogan, who hosts the Joe Rogan Experience podcast, has frequently promoted unproven methods for treating COVID-19 and downplayed the need for vaccines. Last year, Spotify purchased his podcast library for an estimated $100 million.
Look, I know that people in glass houses shouldn't throw hard stuff, but you guys gotta know that that image of Joe Rogan on screen is absolutely ridiculous. Now look, I do the same thing. Everybody does the same thing on YouTube. When you don't like somebody, you awkwardly zoom in their face, and then you put that in the thumbnail because that's the way this platform works. But remember, MSNBC is supposed to be like a higher tier of broadcast. This is cable. YouTubers, they're dirty and scummy, but MSNBC, that's 100% legit. And Joe Rogan, by the way, for his credit, on his podcast, he doesn't do any of this. He styles his thumbnails in a way to let you know that those are Joe Rogan thumbnails, but he's not trashily cramming awkward versions of people's faces in his thumbnails in order to drive clicks or in order to make him look stupid on TV. I just thought this was really interesting because when MSNBC or any of these news agencies seem to be able to show pictures of anybody else, they seem to take from an actual legitimate image that these people want to be shown in place of them. So obviously this was a conscious choice, and I just wanted to point it out that that choice was being made. All of the things that you see on television are being produced and talked about and discussed just so it can convey the right amount of information either directly or indirectly by showing a photo of Rogan looking like a doof.
Dr. Murthy, what do you think are the best ways to push back on misinformation about COVID that continues to be aggressively pushed, whether it be Joe Rogan's podcast or all over Facebook?
So this is one of the reasons why I never once took any of the criticism of the Trump administration in the way that he treated the media seriously, because of questions like the one just given to us by Mika Brzezinski. She just asked a government official how the government or private sector on behalf of the government can act in the best possible way in order to shut down other people in the media, whether that be Joe Rogan, who does his own independent operation, or people on social media. She just asked him, a government official, for censorship, and I'm supposed to believe that Mika Brzezinski and the folks at MSNBC have a problem with Trump saying mean words and not taking any action at all whatsoever to curtail the freedom of the press from the government level. That's really what I'm supposed to believe. That's a concern I'm actually supposed to have. This is what we were talking about the whole time. What these people care the most about is how they're personally treated by the government, not how the government acts against their industry or acts against the First Amendment. Joe Biden is nicer to these people, so they like Joe Biden. But Joe Biden, just like Obama, who by the way was way harsher on the press than Trump in terms of his actions, not in terms of his words, if he goes in that direction, they'll totally back him on it. They'll be like, well, it's Joe Biden. It's Uncle Joe. He's such a sweet guy. Joe Biden is so empathetic. Did you ever hear Joe Biden talk about how there's families at the dinner table and how empathetic he sounded when he talked about those families at the dinner table? I mean, Joe Biden was literally trying to get you fired so you wouldn't be able to put food on the dinner table if you didn't do the medical procedure that he wanted, and he had no authority to do so. But isn't he so sweet when he talks about how people can barely make ends meet as he directs policies to make it more difficult for people to make ends meet? Isn't he great?
Well, Mika, it's such an important question because we can have the best science available, we can have the best public health expertise available, but it won't help people if they don't have access to accurate information. Something I've always believed as a doctor is that people have the right to make their own decisions, but they also have the right to have accurate information.
So while we're focusing on what he's going to say about Joe Rogan, I just want to point out that this is just blatantly a lie from the Surgeon General. If he really believed that people have a choice in what medical procedures that they do or don't want, he would have resigned the moment that Biden started mandating the vaccine at a federal level, under the presumption that if you don't get it, you're going to lose your job. He didn't resign because he doesn't believe that. He's trying to sound reasonable. He's trying to sound like he's arguing for choice. But in reality, the person who's arguing for you to be able to have a choice in whether or not you get vaccinated or not is Joe Rogan, and he wants Joe Rogan taken off the internet. He wants Joe Rogan's show, one of the choices of media outlets that you could have, pulled away from you because he doesn't believe in choice. And that's really what he's going to sell you right here. And again, if he wants to call my bluff, if he wants to say he believes in medical choice, then resign. Resign and say, I'm resigning because Joe Biden tried to mandate the vaccine and he has gone far and beyond what I can deal with as a medical professional. Until that moment comes, don't talk about how you respect people's freedom of choice.
But they also have the right to have accurate information to make that decision with.
So then he talks about how you have this right to access information as he's arguing for the cutoff of your ability to access information because it needs to be accurate so that you can make the right choice. The right choice is the one that him and the administration that he works for is trying to force you into, and they don't like the fact that you haven't done it enough, you haven't complied enough, so they're going to start censoring everything that they think might be leading you to not comply with their orders. But trust me, he believes in choice and he believes that you have a right to accurate information. Now, I've talked about multiple different times on this channel, much to the chagrin of people out there in the audience, about how I'm not that concerned about the vaccine and the negative consequences of the vaccine. Now, I know time will tell whether or not there are negative effects. People like to pretend that in 5 to 10 years, we've never discovered something wrong with the pharmaceutical product before, but I don't think that risk is particularly high. And I recently saw a Kirk Wilcox video on mRNA technology, which is something that a lot of people are being bothered about for some reason. And he makes the case in there, based on the theoretical concepts related to this technology, that what's ending up happening with it in terms of the perception in the general public is very similar, and he didn't use this analogy, this is my analogy, to the way that people react to nuclear energy. Nuclear energy is safe, effective, and it's carbon neutral. If you actually cared about climate change and you didn't want to institute your own personal agenda, you wanted people to be able to function in a similar, if not a better way than we currently function, you would be pushing nuclear energy. But all the lefties are against it. And part of the reason why so many people in the general public are against it is because atomic energy came out shortly after the atomic bomb in the public consciousness. So people have this misperception that the safest form of energy is actually the most dangerous, and there's a lot of hysteria and irrational fear of radiation because radiation is invisible. In fact, the irrational fear of radiation, something that you can't see and you can't really guard against, is also mirrored in the fear of COVID-19. We've talked about multiple different times about how over half of Democrats think that the hospitalization rate for COVID-19, if you were to get it, is above 30%, and a significant portion of that population thinks it's above 50%, when in reality, it's significantly lower than 1%. But this is also true among like 25% of Republicans. People are ginned up in hysteria. They've actually bought in to the government misinformation. Weirdly, the Surgeon General doesn't want to talk about it, and they're freaking out about this. But on top of that, there's this new technology that is so promising in the proposed future treatments that it actually might be able to deal with all these other ailments, but people are rejecting it because the government's trying to force it upon them, leaving a bad taste in their mouth, even though researchers are arguing that with mRNA technology, in the future, you might be able to biopsy a cancerous tumor and within 6 weeks, design a personalized treatment that teaches your cells to fight off that cancer. Only the cancer, so unlike chemotherapy where it hits everything, or radiation where it has all these negative effects, you would actually be able to theoretically significantly treat, reduce, or even potentially cure off particular cancers within the body. And that's just the beginning. Kirk Wilcox also talks about how theoretically, and they have done experiments where they have been successful, I don't believe they're in humans yet, you can regrow heart tissue by stimulating other cells to turn into heart cells, thus lessening the pressure on the organ transplant market. This technology is absolutely amazing, and people are rejecting it due to the fact that the government is trying to force it on people. And even though I think it's good, even though overall I'm not worried about the vaccine, I have this crazy ideology, this crazy principle that says, even if I believe something's good, it is not moral to force it upon your neighbors because you think that you should decide how they run their lives more than themselves. But this Surgeon General is going to go even further, talking about running your lives. He wants to run the social media companies and run your life in terms of what you need to be able to consume in terms of media.
Now, when it comes to how we root out the misinformation in society right now, and give people access to accurate information, we've got to do several things. Number one, we've got to recognize that our technology platforms, whether particularly social media, these have an important role to play. These are the predominant places where we're seeing misinformation spread. These platforms have still not stepped up to do the right thing and do enough, I should say, to reduce the spread of misinformation.
So this is always code word for censor more, become gatekeepers, because fundamentally people like this, authoritarian monsters, don't like that you can communicate person to person. They don't like that you guys can tune in to a channel like this one or different channels like Joe Rogan's and get information that is not being delivered straight from the government mouthpieces that work in mainstream media. They're against it, so they always hint and they always put pressure, and they call these CEOs of these tech companies down to hearings to tell them about how all these people are dying and everything is going to go wrong because, oh my God, you're letting people talk and communicate too freely. You're destroying society, and there's always the implicit threat that if you don't act, then the Democratic Party is going to issue a series of regulations, or they use the Elizabeth Warren tactic, where every time she wants censorship, every time she wants compliance, every time she wants these companies to push her agenda, she ends up promoting the idea that she's going to break up these monopolies, that she's going to target them with antitrust investigations in order to get them to comply with her will. And the thing is, all of this is unconstitutional. Now, you might think, Sean, no, Congress is not allowed to make laws or regulations that directly control these social media companies, that directly call for censorship, but the representatives are allowed to do this, and they're allowed to use this kind of soft power in order to influence these people in order to make them censor on their behalf. That is not the case. The First Amendment sure prohibits laws and regulations against free speech, but the Supreme Court has repeatedly held that the First Amendment protects you not just from direct actions of the government, but from indirect actions attempting to chill your freedom of speech. Because that's what this really is. They're not able to pass laws. They can't pull an Australia where they throw Djokovic out of the country because they're afraid his presence in the country will make Australians think about vaccine policy in a way that they're not allowed to think. And yes, that is the reason they threw him out, not because he wasn't vaccinated, but because they thought he would create a social disturbance by talking about the fact that he wasn't vaccinated. That just goes to show you how far Australia has fallen, and the government officials in the Biden administration look over at that and they don't think, wow, Australia really crossed the line right there. Wow, thank God we have a First Amendment in the United States. They think, wow, how can we do that? Why is the First Amendment here? That is the barrier to all the things we want to impose on the people. We want to stop them from being able to speak and listen to things just like the Australian government. If only we didn't have the First Amendment that guarantees these scumbag underlings that are beneath us the right to freedom of speech and freedom of association. If only there was a way to crack down on that, and this is what they've come up with. Put pressure on the social media companies, have them act as agents, as your arm on your behalf, so that way you can have plausible deniability about the censorship that you're advocating for. That's what's going on right here.
It's your responsibility, all of our responsibilities, to make sure that we are thoughtful in what we are sharing. This is not just about entertainment. It's not just about garnering clicks. This is about people's lives. And we have seen time and time again that misinformation costs people their lives. So, we all have this is not just about what government can do. This is about companies and individuals recognizing that the only way we get past misinformation is if we are careful about what we say and we use the power that we have to limit the spread of that misinformation. That's going to be a critical part of how we get through this pandemic.
And there's the authoritarians' go-to move. People are dying. This is about human lives. We are not talking about something that's minor. We're not talking about an issue of liberty. We're talking about saving lives. I'm on the side of saving lives, so if you disagree with me, if you think the First Amendment exists and it isn't just words on a piece of paper, then you're for killing people. It's absolutely ridiculous. And I've talked about a bunch of times on this channel how I believe that in 5 years, 10 years, whenever those nerds do the studies about the deaths of despair, about the untreated conditions because people weren't getting their screenings due to the lockdowns related to the pandemic, how I truly believe we will find out that the consequences of the lockdown were far worse than the virus as a whole. I mean, when I was talking to Destiny about this, he gave me numbers related to the projections initially about how many people would die if we would do nothing. And if you look at the US numbers, we're kind of on pace for that, even though we've done all these different varieties of things. This is because chances are, and it's really unfortunate, and you can look at all the states in the order of the deaths that they're in. They're basically in the order of population of the states. It seems like there wasn't much we can do to stop the spread of this virus outside of authoritarian, crazy lockdowns like in Australia or China that the American people rightfully would not stand for, and that you were never going to get all 50 states to comply with. But more fundamentally than how I think these things will be viewed in 5 to 10 years is how people's lives are going right now. I've actually had people over the last year that I know that have passed away, and something that really bothers me is knowing that their last year on this earth was put up dealing with all this, that their last year on earth was them separated from their friends and family, not being able to gather, not being able to enjoy their last year of life. Their quality of life went down dramatically, and whether or not the lockdowns actually literally contributed to any of these people's deaths, I have no information on it, and I'm not alleging that at all. But the fact of the matter is, these people had just gone out, and it's really sad. It's really depressing to think that your last year or your last 2 years, because, we're 2 years into 14 days to flatten the curve, were spent locked in your home alone, not seeing friends and family, messing around with Zoom if that's how you went to work. It's really depressing, and I don't think it's worth it. I just really don't. So overall, like I said, you can be pro-vaccine, but not in favor of the government mandates. I mean, if you want to talk about misinformation, we talked about the Democrats believing all these things about hospitalization, but how about Justice Sotomayor thinking that something like 100,000 kids were in intensive care or died from this thing? It's absolutely crazy how the left just promulgates fear and misinformation, and then they pin it on the right wing, but obviously, if they weren't hypocrites, if they didn't have double standards, they wouldn't have any standards at all. But hey, those are just my thoughts. Let me know what you think about the Surgeon General calling for censorship of Joe Rogan down in the comments below. If you liked the video, you show me by leaving a like. You can subscribe for more content. You can follow me on all my social medias. You can support me via the support links. This has been me talking about the thing that I talked about in the video. It's a something. Till next time.